All right, welcome to class. We're going to continue discussing the age of the universe, the age of the Earth. We said last week this is an extremely important topic because if the universe is not billions of years old, the argument for evolution is over. You win in the first round. And we've been going through some of the different scientific ways to show the Earth cannot be billions of years old. Well, now we've covered things in space. Now we're going to look at things on the Earth, okay? We've covered just a couple in the last week. We're going to go through a few more. The Mississippi River, this textbook says, is depositing sediments at the rate of 80,000 tons every hour. It is known as the Muddy Mississippi. If you've ever gone to visit the Mississippi, any place in New Orleans or even south of St. Louis, it's just real murky water because there's so much erosion. A large drainage basin drains into the Mississippi, and lots of topsoil goes with it. The Mississippi is moving very slowly. It only drops 8 inches a mile on the average, and it's a 920-mile run from up north clear down to the New Orleans Delta. But as it brings this mud down there, eventually when it slows down, the mud drops out. Sediment drops out of the river, and it makes this delta. A delta is made of mud that a river carried in and then dropped off. As long as the faster water moves, the more sediments it can hold, and the bigger chunks of sediment it can hold. As soon as it slows down, they drop off. Maybe you've seen up north where they put snow fences. How many have ever seen those before? The purpose of a snow fence is this blowing snow. As soon as it hits that fence, it slows down just enough that it drops the snow out of the wind. Because at a certain speed, the flakes fall out. And you put the snow fence a certain distance away from the road, so it drops the snow. Instead of on the highway, it drops it away from the highway. Well, moving water does the same thing. As soon as it slows down, it drops the sediments. That's why you see sandbars at places where the river turns and bends. It drops the sediments out and it makes sandbars right there in the bends of the river. Mississippi River is dropping all this sediment in New Orleans, and it's making this delta grow larger and larger. The sediment, or the mud, probably really starts up near Memphis, Tennessee. All the rest of it is filled in with sediments, clear down to Louisiana. Because it's all sediments, the whole state of Louisiana, or most of the state of Louisiana, is slowly sinking. Very difficult to build a highway and keep it strong across Louisiana. Drive over Highway 20 sometime and you'll see what I'm talking about. So every few years they got to repair it because it's on spongy ground. There just isn't a good way to build a solid highway. But this delta is growing larger. Estimates range from 10,000 to 30,000, so I picked a high number to be merciful to the evolutionists, to give them all the benefit of the doubt I can. The delta is certainly less than 30,000 years old. The Mississippi changes course all the time. It used to, till the town of New Orleans became so dependent on the Mississippi. It's trying to change course again. Mississippi is trying very hard to bypass the town of New Orleans, and so the Army Corps of Engineers and all sorts of smart people have been out there trying to figure out how to keep the river in this channel, because it doesn't want to stay there. Maybe you've seen projects and stuff on the news about that. But they're fighting desperately, spending millions of dollars to keep it where it is. Because if that section of the Mississippi dried up, well, the whole town of New Orleans loses a lot of industry, because now their boats can't go, and it all goes back to money. But the delta is about 30,000 years or less. So the obvious question would be, if the Earth is billions of years old, why isn't the whole Gulf of Mexico full of mud? Now, the evolutionist will say, well, it's 30,000 years. That proves the Bible is wrong, because the Bible says 6,000 years. Now, if you look through typical secular textbooks, they will say there was an ice age 10,000 years ago, and there was an ice age 30,000 years ago, and there was an ice age 100,000 years ago. Where are they getting these numbers from? They're getting the 30,000 number from this delta. This is their explanation for why there's only 30,000 years worth of mud. They'll say, well, that was the end of the last ice age. That's their answer. Well, it could be there's only 30,000 years worth of mud out there because it's not millions of years old. They say the 10,000 years for the last ice age because of the Niagara Falls problem. That's their answer. Their answer is always, well, an ice age, reset the clock and started it again. Well, maybe so, but maybe the Earth is not millions of years old. The fact is, it's not full of mud. This is a picture of the oldest tree in the world. It's called the bristlecone pine trees in southern California. They're in the White Mountains, way up in the mountains. Very inhospitable climate. Very little rain. The bristlecone pine, the largest one, they call it the oldest one, they call it the Methuselah tree, is the nickname for it, for obvious reasons. The Methuselah tree is 4,300 years old. Now you need to understand, tree ring dating is not an exact science. Trees, the rings on a tree do not indicate summer, winter, summer, winter. They can indicate lots of rain, lots of rain, no rain. I met a guy a few weeks ago at a church I was at. He said, Brother Hovind, I have been raising trees to make walking sticks, professional, expensive walking sticks for rich people. Oh, I didn't know there was a market for that, but that's what he does. He carves these fancy walking sticks for people. He says, I have raised thousands of trees and made these walking sticks. He said, I raised my trees for 7 years, cut them down, and they always have an average of 11 rings in 7 years. Well, how do you get 11 rings in 7 years if they're annual rings? See, they aren't annual rings. So tree ring dating is a far cry from an exact science, especially with these trees because they're such a gnarled mess. I mean, they kind of grow this way a while, and then they grow this way a while, and it's just not a simple science for counting these. And you don't want to cut it down to count the rings because then you found the age, but you killed the tree. So they've got a special drill. It's like a little pipe. It's hollow, and it drills a pipe into the tree, a core, and pulls out the middle part, just like they do with the ice rings, only these are much smaller. The entire pipe is about the size of the lead in a pencil. And they drill all the way into the tree and pull out this real skinny core, lay it down, and they have to count the rings under a microscope. Because these trees grow about an inch in 100 years. So in an inch, you've got 100 rings to count. When you look at the trees, they're ugly. You will swear they're dead, but they're not. They're still alive. And they don't mark which one is the oldest because they're afraid souvenir hunters are going to go up there and say, I want to have a piece of this one. And there's only so many pieces of it you can get, and pretty soon it's not there anymore. But if you go up to the White Mountains in Southern California and see the bristlecone pine trees, the oldest one is 4,300 years old. Some will say, no, they found one that's 4,600. Some will say, well, by overlapping tree ring dating with tree stumps and logs found in Indian dwellings and stuff like this, the ancient cliff dwellings, they overlap these tree ring and they get a tree ring sequence that goes back 8,000 years. Well, this is real questionable because tree ring dating, first, is not an exact science. Secondly, two trees can grow side by side and have very different ring pattern. If there's a big tree and a little tree, the big one gets all the sunlight, the little one doesn't get any. One day the big one dies, now the little one gets all the sunlight, so his growth pattern is much different. You can have two trees on opposite sides of the same mountain getting different amounts of rainfall. Because when air goes up, it drops all of its water. When it comes down the mountain, it absorbs water. That's called the rain shadow in Washington State. One side of the mountains is loaded with trees. As soon as you get over the top, it's basically desert. Because as air rises, it cools and drops its moisture. When it comes down, it warms up and absorbs moisture. So you get what's called a rain shadow on one side of the mountain. And so trees can be affected by this. So what they've tried to do to discredit the creationists on this tree ring dating question is try to find tree ring sequences where they find a tree that has several rings. You know, they look at the ring pattern where they're kind of close and then they're far apart. Then they're kind of close for several years and then far apart for a few years. They would consider these to be the good years when it got lots of rain. These would be the bad years when it didn't get much rain. Then they find another log someplace else and they try to line it up. You know, so they got good years, bad years, good years, bad years, and this one will extend farther, and this one will extend farther this way. And so they've stretched their overlapping tree ring dating to, I don't know what the number is, probably close to 6,000 years. But this would be based on all sorts of very obvious assumptions, and it wouldn't hold up 2 seconds in a court of law. The problem is it doesn't have to hold up in a court of law. It just has to be taught in school. You just have to convince the kids of it. That's where the problem comes in right there. So the oldest living tree is 4,300 years old.